Hello, everybody. This is Seano McFarland. Welcome to the Seano Show. My guest today is Noah Levine, straight up change agent, badass, meditation teacher, author, founder of the Dharma punk movement against the strained Buddhist meditation society, Refuge Recovery. The brother started a revolution, and he's helped thousands of people wake up.
I had fantasies of taking myself out at about 5 years old before I even picked up anything. Pain hurts, and when you resist it, it hurts more. But if you soften to it, it just hurts. The Buddha characterized his path to awakening as going against the stream. I was like, okay, this is a way for me to frame that natural rejection energy, rebellion energy that I have into awakening, into service, into healing.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
It's a real blessing to have you here, but we're gonna start. You called an audible. We're gonna start with a little meditation. We're gonna get right to it.
Yeah, let's just jump however you want to be, posture-wise. You don't have to sit any special way, but let your eyes close, let your body relax into this posture. Take a moment to release any unnecessary tension that your body's holding. Let the jaw, the brow, the heart soften, the belly soften. Tension is often resistance to what's happening. So much of meditation, mindfulness, this style is turning towards and opening up, non-resistance, acceptance, and an attitude of kindness, friendliness, radical self-acceptance, loving kindness, compassion towards the joys and the sorrows of our life, of our existence, life in the body. And just landing with the present time experience of sensation, the breath coming and going, sounds arising and passing, thoughts arising, passing, floating through awareness, but let the awareness be bigger than the contents of the mind. So that the sensations, the emotions, the thoughts have room to arise, sustain, pass. Taking a moment to turn towards our own heart and mind with forgiveness. Just the intention, saying to ourselves, I forgive you as much as I can in this moment for any of the tendencies of the mind to compare or judge, crave, resent. Just sending some forgiveness to our minds, some forgiveness to our bodies for all of the aches, aging, difficulties of having this physical body, this body that craves pleasure, that hates pain. And taking this forgiveness and as an act of compassion, as an act of love, and extending it to the people in our lives. Anything we're holding on to, the intention of releasing the past. And then extending this open heart, compassionate, wise, forgiving heart outward in all directions, all living beings. And when you're ready, allowing your eyes to open and come back to this as a 3-minute inner, outer practice.
No better way to start the show, man. Thank you, brother. Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Of course, you weren't always this calm, reflective. We're going to talk how we got there. It's so, man, I have so much love for you right now, brother. I felt that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start with childhood. We got to start there, right?
Yep. Scene of the crime.
Scene of the crime. Your father, very famous author,
Yep.
activist, poet,
Yep.
healer.
Yeah. He would like to think of himself primarily as a poet, I think.
Yeah.
Or thought of himself. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, you got Ram Dass in the kitchen. You got Jack Hornfield in the kitchen. You got Wayne Dyer around. What was that like?
It's hard to remember.
Mm.
I do have some, snippets of childhood with the Sangha. Sangha is that kind of, or satsang or Sangha is that sort of Hindu Buddhist term for fellowship of his crew. I remember some of the Hindu, what they're called bandaras. It's this celebration of Neem Karoli Baba, who was their guru. And I remember some of those. My childhood was quite mixed, and my relationship to my father was quite mixed. In some ways, he was very kind and very compassionate and wise, but also he wasn't very present. Wasn't very available to his children. And, I've come to, kind of understand that his own stuff, he was actually much more interested in being the teacher than being the father.
Oof.
And so, there were some wounds over there.
Great coach, bad player.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he would say he was a great parenting coach. He was a great death and dying coach. He was a great meditation teacher. He had some real wisdom. And I feel so grateful that some of the conditioning from that early childhood was stuff like I have a memory of being 4 years old and burning myself, getting burnt on a heater, one of those stand-up heaters. And my, ass just burnt against the heater. And I can remember him teaching me to soften to the pain.
At 4.
At 4. And so getting that wisdom of
oh, wow.
Pain hurts. And when you resist it, it hurts more. When you meet it with anger and tightness, it hurts even worse. But if you soften to it, it just hurts. Mm-hmm. Right? So there's these seeds of compassion. Of responding rather than reacting were implanted early on. I feel so grateful that some of that wisdom conditioning was there in my childhood.
Was he sober when you were young?
My father was not sober. My father was an ex-junkie,
right.
Heroin addict. He was a hippie, psychedelic cowboy that was, when I was growing up, they're doing ketamine, they're doing LSD, they're doing, they're smoking weed. He's not doing heroin anymore, and he's hardly drinking. He would have a beer once in a while. When I got sober, he said he never drank a beer again. He stopped. He's like, you came and said you're an alcoholic, so I'll, in solidarity with you, I'll not drink either. He didn't stop smoking weed, but right. He never drank again. Yeah.
Wow. You talk a lot about in your great books, and please, my audience, I beg you, read Refuge, Recovery. It's anything he writes, it's inspired, and it's a great manual for people. So please buy any of his books. You talk about growing up and feeling isolated, not feeling just knowing something's different about you, how do you fit in, right? Can you walk us through that? And kind of starting when you started using.
My parents split it. I was about 2. Don't remember that, but by the time I was 5, I was feeling suicidal ideation. I had fantasies of taking myself out at about 5 years old before I even picked up anything.
Wow.
And, my father was this death and dying guy. I'd seen terminally ill. I'd seen people on their deathbed. I'd been taught that death isn't the end, that we reincarnate. So in my, kind of traumatized and angsty 5-year-old mind, I was like, I'll get out of this life.
At 5. And
start over. Wow. Because dad's not around, stepdad's abusive, mom's an alcoholic. I don't want to be, my older sisters, were always fighting. I had younger twin brother and sister. They're getting all that kind of not getting the attention, not getting the love, not getting the presence. I don't want to exist. And I was getting some abuse from my stepfather. And so I got suicidal, and I had a knife, and I had a plan, and I had and that feeling of just discontent and suffering. And then when I was around that time, 6, 7 years old, I was like, well, let me try some of that alcohol that my mom's drinking. Let me try some of that weed that both of my parents are smoking. And I'm smoking cigarettes. My first arrest, I was like 6 years old. I was smoking cigarettes in the field, and I lit the field on fire. And the fire department came, and they eventually were like, oh yeah, this kid fucking burned the field down. And they took me in, and men in uniforms took me to the station.
Right.
I mean, it was the fire department, not the police department.
Yeah.
But, and
Oh, that's beautiful.
so yeah, there was a core feeling of isolation and differentness. And then in school, I went back and forth between being like class clown and bully, whatever attention. I learned early on that negative attention was better than no attention. And, I got expelled from elementary school for vandalizing the classroom. They were like, you can't come back to this elementary school. It was 4th grade, maybe 5th. And I started using, and once I started using, I was like, oh, there's relief here. I don't have to kill myself. I can just get high every day.
Right.
At 7 years old.
We're at 10 now. Got it.
By the time I'm 10, I'm taking LSD. By the time I think I started doing cocaine, first time I was 12.
Right.
I'm eating LSD. When I was 10, I was smoking weed, as often as I could get it. When I was 10, I found in my mother's closet 2 grocery bags full of some weird dried up substance that wasn't weed. And I asked my sister, who's 2 years older than me, and getting high. She's 12, I'm 10. I said, what's that? That's where the weed usually is. That's not weed. What is that? She said, they're called mushrooms, magic mushroom. And you don't smoke them, you eat them, and they taste disgusting, but they get you high as fuck. So at 10 years old, I ate mushrooms.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of times.
Yeah.
I was taking these big, couple ounce bags and nibbling on mushrooms and running around in the redwoods where I grew up, just tripping balls.
Wow. Yeah.
And then, experimentation. And then, I don't know where the line crosses into addiction, but pretty young for me. And I look at children, I'm like, you guys aren't getting high, are you? I was getting high as a child.
As a child. And nobody knew.
They knew at some point.
They
I mean, when
really
I was
care,
10,
but
my
nobody-
mom's like, where's my 2 ounces of mushrooms
Right.
that are missing from I'm selling those for someone.
Right.
They knew.
Yeah, the fights weren't about your grades. They were about, where the fuck's my shrooms
My
at, son?
dad's like, somebody stole, 2 sheets of LSD out of the freezer.
Right. Let's have a family meeting.
It's probably my sister. I'm 11. It wasn't me.
Yeah. Buddy, let's go to your bottom. And when you get sober, it's such a great, yeah. And thank God. My God.
I've got that feeling that I'm sure you and so many people can relate to, is that before drugs and alcohol destroyed my life, they saved my life. That suicidal feeling, that self-destructive urge, drugs and alcohol took the edge off. And also, I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s. I found punk rock. And punk rock and drugs were such a great outlet and had so much fun and was such a solution to my trauma, to my suffering, to my confusion. And then that line gets crossed where it's not, taking drugs or, and going to the punk rock show, but, doing crimes and, smoking crack in the alley. And that happened for me pretty young. By the time I'm 16, I'm strung out. I'm shooting heroin. I'm smoking crack. I had about a 2-year crack run, 15 to 17. And I'm doing felonies and I'm getting arrested for felonies and put in juvie over and over. And at some point, I was like, I don't want to live this is suffering. This is no longer a solution. This isn't, I'm getting these temporary reliefs followed by all of these consequences. I keep getting locked up. Every morning it's a mission to get high again. So by the time I'm 17, I feel like I don't want to live. I don't want to die. I don't want to be locked up. I don't know what to do. I started getting sent to 12-step rooms when I was 13 years old because I got arrested so much. Court ordered, go get your court card signed. I knew about Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew it was a bunch of adults talking about God, some sort of weird religious group. And I was like, I can't believe they're sending me to church to get my card signed.
Wow.
In my 13-year-old mind, because that's all I heard. I knew what I was doing. I didn't want to be doing it. My friends are getting killed. My friends are getting sent to prison on long sentences.
Because where did you grow up?
Santa Cruz.
In Santa Cruz, right.
Yeah.
And what year are we at now?
1988, 87, 88.
Fucking rough and tumble down there.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, Santa Cruz is a beautiful California surf town.
Yeah.
With the waves and the redwoods and the palm trees and like every town,
right.
The underbelly of drugs and gangs and violence and,
Yes.
Santa Cruz has a weird history of like one of the serial killer capitals.
Oh.
In the 70s, there was a whole bunch of different serial killers in Santa Cruz.
Oh, that's a great distinction.
And then Lost Boys, and this is like the time of Lost Boys. Like I think I was either locked up or in New Mexico when Lost Boys was filmed. But all my punk rock friends were extras in Lost Boys. They filmed that in like '86.
Oh no shit! Oh wow.
And so that's the sort of the scene. All those punk rock kids that are at the boardwalk. That was like my crew.
Oh wow, I love that, man.
I wasn't there. So my bottom was. That last day, it was morning mission, drinking vodka and fruit punch. Then, getting kind of well enough, drunk enough to go and be like, okay, now we got to steal something to trade for coke or heroin or whatever real drugs we're going to do today. Alcohol, appetizer.
Right on.
Now we're on a mission. Broke into a car, tried to get the stereo, got the stereo, got 11 a.m., downtown, like just in public, broke a window, grabbed the stereo, got chased, got caught, got arrested, got sent to juvie. Once in juvie, I was like, and I had what I learned in the 12-step rooms, that feeling pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I had that I'm on probation. I've got dirty drug tests on probation. I have a 7-year suspended youth authority sentence for the last felony arrest. I had that feeling of like, I'm going away for a long time and I don't want to exist. And I, while in the holding cell, had like a pseudo suicide attempt. Started smashing my head against the concrete wall.
Oh, wow.
Woke up in a padded cell, came to kind of, I was in one of those brownouts. Mm-hmm. It's not a full blackout.
Yeah.
It comes back.
Yeah.
Woke up in the observation cell, not in a full straitjacket, but in the room where you can't hurt yourself. And I think too, internally, I had a feeling of overwhelming, I guess, shame, dread, and it occurred to me. I think maybe it felt like the first time it occurred to me. Look what I did to myself again.
Oh, so you had a moment of clarity where you could really see it.
I had a moment of clarity where I was like, I did this to myself again.
Right.
I keep doing this to myself. Up to that time, and I'd been in that institution a dozen times, juvie, Santa Cruz. Up to that time, it was blame. Fucking cops, fucking society system.
Shitty dope.
Fucking hippies, some narc, whatever. It was always blame.
Blame, blame, blame. The addict's anthem.
But that time I was like, man, look what I'm doing to myself.
It's all me.
A little bit of personal responsibility, just that crack. In the denial, in the blame. With that came all of that, like when we're blaming everyone else, then there's not as much shame.
Yes.
Because there's no response, not my, but taking some responsibility came that flood of regret and of that like, oh man, I've stolen from everyone, I've hurt everyone, I've just flooded with that shame, regret, guilt.
Let
but also that crack of like, oh, if I got myself here and I'm not just a victim, maybe I can get myself out of here. Hope, a little bit of hope. And two things happened. One is the H&I 12-step people came in, and I knew one of them from the crack park. Used to do crimes with him. His brother and I were running buddies. His brother had just gone to prison for a very long time for a murder. He got clean. He came in. He was doing service. He said, come check out the meeting. And I went to check out the meeting out of hope, out of willingness. And I heard, young guys talking about we can stay sober.
Right.
And that implanted some inspiration, some hope. And then the other thing that happened was my father took the opportunity during a phone call. He didn't actually come visit me because he was probably busy teaching. But he took a phone call and he gave me some basic meditation instructions. Not that different than what we started with. Present time awareness of the breath and body, release, soften, ignore your mind, keep coming back to the breath. Ignore your mind, keep coming back to the breath. And that simple present time awareness, mindfulness technique that I actually took back to my cell and started applying gave me, I had a little bit of hope. And then I said, oh, okay, this is a technique. This is something that I can do. Because the 12-step thing of like pray and God will remove it from you, I'm too skeptical. I'm too rational. I'm too punk for that shit.
Yeah, right.
But this, which is weird, hippie, whatever, but it's also a practical, applicable tool that's not asking for some mystical belief. It's just, what are you paying attention to? Mm-hmm. Ignore your mind. Come back to your breath. Mm-hmm. Ignore, disengage. And I saw that revelation. Like, I didn't know I didn't have to obey my mind. I spent the first half of my life doing what my mind told me to. And it said, take drugs and commit crimes. And so I did that. And then in meditation, I realized my mind can be saying, hey, take drugs. And I can say, thanks for sharing. I'll come back to the breath. I'm not going to get hooked into that thought. Not that I could do that in the beginning very well, but just that it just made sense to me.
Why do you think? I'm sure your dad has probably told you that 1,000 times, or a version of what you just heard it. It was that thing.
I think I heard
your heart. You were ready to hear it that day.
I think I heard it in a different way that day, but also I grew up around it, but my dad wasn't pushy. He wasn't like, you need to learn this and this is, he was a little hands off. He was a little like, you find your own way with things. This is what we do, but I'm not trying to make you a Buddhist.
All right.
You get to figure it out.
Did he not come visit you because he knew you weren't ready?
I was ready. Right, that's the turning point. I was ready,
but the
he probably didn't know if I was ready.
Interesting.
And I would like to think that, but I don't think it's true. I think that he didn't come visit me because he wasn't that interested in parenting.
Showing up for you.
Yeah, because he didn't show up then. He didn't show up when I got my shit together. He didn't show up when I got married. He didn't show up when I graduated from grad school. He didn't show up. He was somebody who didn't show up. I saw my father if he was in town teaching.
Oh.
That's when I saw my father.
Wow.
Or I went to visit him at his home in New Mexico. That's when I saw him. He never went out of his way to come and connect. It just wasn't in his wheelhouse.
I'm going to come back to, I just want to tap into that real quick.
Yeah.
You talk so much about forgiveness. And what do you teach parents like that who didn't show up for that? And you've got all these people coming into you with resentments. What do you teach them about letting go of the past around the parents and things they did?
Just what we did, just release it. But the releasing, the forgiveness is also feeling the pain, like tending to, that's a wound. Mm-hmm. That's a trauma. That's feel it. Mindfulness helps us feel what's present. And then the mind wants to repeat it over and over, which has us re-experiencing it. So that phrase, I forgive you as much as I can in this moment, starts to loosen that grasp, that clinging, that repetitive identification with it. And so there's this, for me, I did forgiveness meditation probably every day for 10 years before I really got some relief. Because in the beginning, you do the forgiveness meditation and your mind says,
No, I still hate them.
no, fuck
Right.
you.
Right.
And then slowly it's that kind of war of attrition, I guess, that sort of process that happens
But there has to be some willingness.
Of course.
Always about the willingness.
And patience and perseverance,
Right.
right? Because a lot of people are like, I'm willing, what will fix it? Well, it's like, here's a technique that if you do for a decade, it will change it. And maybe it'll only be a year or two, but it's not a quick fix because you're creating neural pathways.
Right on.
And you're training this mind of these neural pathways that are very habituated towards clinging and judging and comparing and resenting.
Mm-hmm.
So now you got to create a new pathway that's not a naturally well-trodden mind habit of forgiveness.
That was at 17. You haven't used since then.
I relapsed. I was in juvie, started meditating, started going to meetings. I was sent to a group home. When I was in the group home about 4 months later, they said, go visit your family. I went and visited my family. I started drinking. I knew I was sort of like, fuck, I know I'm a drug addict. Am I an alcoholic? I'm 17. Alcohol's pregame. Alcohol is something you do in the morning. Alcohol is something that you do at night, to come down. I wasn't a big, let's just go get drunk. I was like, let's get drunk and do crimes and do drugs. So I had some questions about my alcoholism at 17 years old. So I tried some controlled drinking. I don't know if I'd heard this in the book or not, but there's that place in the 12-step book
I love this
where it
slide.
says if you're not completely convinced that you're a real alcoholic, try some controlled drinking.
Right. It might be worth a bad case of the jitters.
Might be worth a bad case of the jitters. So I was doing that. I did it twice. And ended up not being able to stop once I started. I'd never tried to stop drinking before. I was like, okay, now I'm going to try to stop. I'm going to have 3 beers and see if I can, see if I can just catch a nice buzz. And then once I had the alcohol in my system, I was
boom,
boom, boom, boom, boom, boom, till I'm passed out.
But this time you were honest yourself and realized, oh, fuck, I got it.
Yeah, because I was also listening.
You're listening.
And that was it. Got sober. Stayed sober.
What year?
This is sometime in August in 1988. I got locked up in May. I drank in August. Wasn't keeping track of the date. I got locked up on May 10th in 1988. That was my sobriety date because I was locked up and pretending that I wasn't relapsing in August. But really, it was sometime in August. So later, I had to revise my sobriety date from May to August. And I actually celebrate September 1st because I wasn't paying attention to the dates in August that I was drinking.
September 1st.
September 1st is when I celebrate. So 36 this year or 37, 1988.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
However long ago that was.
I got sober now, so I'm class of 87.
You're
so
87?
Yeah. And I just love that it's very rare you find people young. So were you 18?
I was 17.
Yeah, 17. I was 20.
Yeah.
That are still on the beam, on the path.
Yeah.
So I love that we're still here.
Yeah.
It's fucking awesome.
Yes.
So, but
And a whole bunch of factors that kept us coming back and, kept us in it. And there's so many millions of people that didn't stay. And it's so interesting to look at the factors of those of us who've stayed and like, oh, how did you stay? You were 22. We were young.
Yeah, super young.
I was very young, but 22 is very young too.
Very young. Very young. You're going to AA.
Yeah.
You're liking, you have a lot of willingness, you're checking out, but it's like, you got some questions.
I kind of hate it.
Yeah. Right.
I've got some willingness. I have the delusion that if I can get the stuff, there's a material, unconsciously, I believe there's a material solution. If I stay out of jail and I get car, motorcycle, leather jacket, boots, record collection, adolescent desire system.
Yeah.
I don't need a, fancy car. I need a lowrider. I need a 60s shit bucket.
Fuck yeah, dude.
That the mind is saying, then you'll be happy. And what I'm hearing in the 12-step rooms about like God will restore you to sanity and you're powerless and all of this Judeo-Christian theistic perspective on the human I don't get it. I don't believe it. 2 years kind of dry drunk, meditating a little bit, praying a little bit, going to meetings, being of service a little bit. Get a sponsor, don't really call them that kind of like early adolescent fist fighting in meetings. It's more about like trying to get laid and trying to be cool than
surrendering, trying to find something higher.
Or having a spiritual practice. But 2 years in, I get into some legal trouble for graffiti. But I'm also stealing and I'm gang affiliated and I'm,
sober horse thief.
Yes. And so but at 19, I kind of hit a emotional bottom, spiritual, bottom. And I'm like, okay, this material, I've got the car and the motorcycle and the girlfriend and I'm miserable. Didn't work. The only thing that's ever given me any real relief is this meditation practice. Man. And I've seen the people in the 12-step world talk about the happy, joyous freedom they found from working the 12 steps. Maybe I'll try it now at 19, probably around 1990. And I signed up for a meditation retreat. I was like, I feel like this is my best bet. I'm going to go on this meditation retreat with Jack Kornfield. I asked my dad, I was like, I want to do this more seriously. He's like, go on this retreat with Kornfield. It's like, okay, I'll go. 3 days silent meditation retreat.
Oh, fuck.
Difficult.
Shit.
Wanted to leave, stayed. Wanted to leave, stayed. Felt a sense of accomplishment that I stayed and felt a deeper sense of hope. Here's a path that I can walk. And I did the 12 steps thoroughly. Did the third step prayer. My sponsor said, I was like, I don't believe in this shit. And he's like, well, just say it. You willing? And I was like, I'm willing. He's like, well, let's do the third step prayer 3 times a day for 90 days. Just really get it in there. I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then when we, and then thorough 4th step, thorough 5th step, did that. And when we got to 6 and 7, he said, let's do the 7th step prayer 3 times a day for 90 days.
Wow.
Maybe it was 30 days. Anyways, for a period. And so I just did it. I took all of the actions and thorough 8th and 9th step and made all of the amends and, gradually knocked on the doors of the houses that I'd robbed or neighborhoods that I'd broken into cars and made amends to some drug dealers, like did it thoroughly in that sort of, and there's this big shift in, 19, 20 years old to like, I'm going to get enlightened. I want to have a spiritual awakening. This is the only place where I've ever found any real solution, any real hope. This meditation practice, 12-step to the best of my ability, but I never came to believe.
Nah.
I never came to a place where I could really assign the transformation that was happening in my life to an external higher power. I felt like I'm taking these actions and prayer gives me some relief and meditation gives me some relief and honesty and service and all of these actions give me some relief. But it's the actions that I'm taking that I feel like are creating some change in my life, not a mystical, magical, external source. And I've just always had that sort of skeptical, rational kind of mentality. So I never really came to believe, but I did the steps and I love the 12-step fellowship. And, 30 something years later, I still go. I never stopped going.
Hey.
I like Buddhism better. Buddhism makes more sense to me than monotheism, even open-minded, Judeo-Christian 12-step model. So open-minded. I appreciate that it's tries to make room, but it makes room for all kinds of theists. We don't care what you believe as long as you come to believe, kind of thing. And so for a non-theist like me, there's always that feeling of like, oh man, I never really came to believe. That never really, this sort of higher power God language never resonated for me. But spiritual practice resonates. Kindness and love and compassion and forgiveness and transformation, healing, the outcome of these steps being a spiritual awakening, the outcome of this meditation process being a spiritual awakening, that kind of just hooked me. And, and I heard where they said, be quick to see where other kind of religious and spiritual people are right. And we know only a little. I heard all of that stuff. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to keep participating in this world, but I got to find something that makes a deeper sense, to me. And eventually, I studied Hinduism and I studied Sufism. And at some point, I read the Bible and the Quran and, the Torah, the Old Testament, because I was like, I got to figure out what all of these, monotheists believe. I know I don't believe it, but I'm not sure even what it is. So I did some study and, so I had not so much contempt prior to investigation, a little bit of contempt post investigation.
I love that, man.
And Buddhism just was what made, it's kind of resonates, just my heart practice. And so I've been at that for 30 plus.
Walk the audience through when you first came out here and what you started out here and how that all came about, because you were doing all kinds of interesting jobs up until that.
So my employment, in my 20s, I worked in the medical field. I became an EMT. I worked in hospitals, ER tech, emergency room tech. I was a nursing assistant for a while. I did this I knew I wanted to be of service. I learned that from recovery. I learned that from Buddhism. I want to use my life to help others. I did community outreach. I worked at a HIV testing clinic. I worked at a, kind of harm reduction, giving needles to active addicts. I was like, I just want to help. How can I help? And, but meditation, I was going on retreats every year, 2-3 retreats every year, meditating every day. I took a vow of celibacy in my 20s, spent 2 years not masturbating, having any intentional sexual activity. I was doing a sort of pseudo monastic householder, like I'm going to be a monk, like, these monks that I'm studying with, but I'm going to still listen to punk rock and drive the lowrider.
And smoke cigarettes. Fuck yeah. That's what I love about you, man.
Exactly.
No, yeah.
And then at some point, my friends started noticing, okay, you're changing. You're still, I think the reality for me in that first decade is that I was changing, but my ego was also very identified with being spiritual, and that kind of, I was straight edge, which, that punk rock straight edge. Vegan, I was sugar-free, I was caffeine-free, I was celibate, and I was pretty sure that I was better than everyone else in the room because I was more disciplined than everyone else in the room. And that ego trip that became. But some of them were like, you're kind of a dick, but we want to learn meditation too. At least you're not violent anymore. At least you're not, crazy like that. Now you're just self-centered. So people started asking me about meditation. And then about 10 years in, my teachers said, Cornfield said, I want to train you. I want to put you through this training thing. My father said, yes, you should start teaching. You should try to do this book. So, about 10 years into my practice and my recovery, I started kind of edging into this teacher role, partially because my friends were asking me about it, partially because my teachers were encouraging me to do it. And when I started teaching, there was some level of a conscious decision of like, okay, recovery has been my path to meditation. Am I going to do like a recovery meditation teacher thing? And I decided, I don't want to exclude anybody in my community and my generation and anybody in the world that's not an addict. I don't want to say like, you can't come meditate because you're not an alcoholic. I want to include everyone. So when I started teaching, it was like all are welcome, whether you're in recovery or not in recovery.
You're very generous with your welcomes.
Yeah, I
really love that about what you guys do there.
Yeah. Try to,
you greet them with such kindness from the gate.
Well, it's the Buddha's first noble truth. All beings are suffering.
Straight up.
We can have this thing as recovering addicts, like where we have special suffering. Yeah. This is because I'm an alcoholic or I'm an addict. And it's like, yes, there's some truth of that, but also everyone has suffering.
Right on.
And there's a cause of suffering and there's a path to end suffering, whether it's become addiction or it's just your own neurotic, self-centered, normal human suffering. So all of that sort of led me to teaching and the books that became successful, and the people, more and more people started coming. And then more people came and said, we want a Buddhist recovery program. And I was like, well, there isn't one. There's the 12 steps and there's Buddhism, and we can integrate them. But there's no such thing as a Buddhist recovery program. It doesn't exist yet. And so then at some point, and I saw, half of the people in the room are hoping that this will either augment their 12-step program or replace it. And there was a good chunk of people who were like, no 12 steps for me. Buddhism is the only thing that makes sense. So at some point, that gave birth to what is now Refuge Recovery.
How long ago was that?
The book came out 10 years ago this year, came out in 2014. But here in Los Angeles, we had 2 meditation centers, and I'd been training meditation teachers, and, hundreds of people were coming through, and half of them are in recovery. So we started probably in around 2007 or 2008 Buddhist recovery meetings here in Santa Monica, over in Hollywood at the 2 meditation centers that I had. So there was a sort of pilot program for a couple of years while I was writing the book. And then the book came out in 2010, and it went from, there's 5 of these meetings here in Los Angeles to people starting them all over the world, all over the country. By 4 years in, there was almost 800 meetings.
Wow.
So by 14, 15, we were looking at like 800 meetings, nationally. And there's meetings in Thailand, there's meetings in Europe, and there's meetings all over within 4 or 5 years.
Were you staying right size during that time? Were you like, oh, this is amazing? Or were you like, oh, fuck, look what I fucking did? Because you took a lot of hit for creating this movement.
Yes.
A lot of people were like, huh?
I did and I didn't. I mostly got praise. And all of the haters, I didn't get much of it to me. And even on the online stuff, there wasn't a lot of critical stuff in that time. There wasn't a lot of bad reviews. There wasn't. I'm sure people were upset about it. The old school 12 steps is the only way. I'm sure that people, but I didn't hear a lot about it. I mostly got praise. I don't know if I stayed. I'm sure I got a little bit inflated. I have a tendency, like I was talking about, even before when I was just a, young celibate guy, I have a tendency towards arrogance anyways. So I don't know if I became that much more arrogant or not, but I have that sort of, I think like not everyone, but a lot of us, that's kind of pretty sure that I'm always right kind of attitude. So I don't know if the success fueled that much or not, but probably some. If anything, I actually would hope, what I hope is true is that because at that point I was 20 years sober and I was meditating every day and I was continuing to go on retreats and I'm living my life in this philosophy and practice that says, don't take any of it personal. The ego is not who you are. There's not even a permanent self here in this human experience. And also, you didn't make any of this shit up. This is just 2,600-year-old teachings that you're implementing in your life, that you're sharing with others. What I would like to hope is mostly true is, like, I saw some of my friends become rock stars or really successful artists or something, where the whole world was telling them, you've created something amazing, your music, your acting, your art, whatever it is. And that kind of ego picking up on that. I felt the whole time like the world was saying, you've, translated something that already existed. We like the way that you share with us these ancient teachings. That, for me, it wasn't like I didn't create anything. I translated and I brought together punk rock and Buddhism, and I brought together recovery and Buddhism, but I didn't make up recovery. I didn't make up Buddhism. I didn't make up punk rock. I didn't, none of that was to me. These are just the things that like changed my life, and I want to share them with you. But I didn't make any of it up.
That's beautiful.
One of the reflections that I had about the kind of inflation, staying right-sized, is I think part of what happened for me was that I actually didn't see the kind of power that I had.
Wow.
I still thought I was a punk rock kid that's just part of the fellowship, and had that sort of, in punk rock, there's no rock stars. We're all just part of this. In recovery, there's no leaders. We're all just part of this. But I was actually had, stepped into this role as a spiritual teacher and had hundreds, thousands of people looking to me for guidance. And not only, for what I was teaching, but how I was, walking the walk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was in some denial about the level of power and projection and responsibility that I had in that. Because I felt committed to authenticity and, keeping it real.
Yeah.
And, not changing. One of the accusations that I got later was that I didn't have the appropriate, what's the word? The appropriate kind of behavior as a spiritual teacher.
Right.
And that like spiritual teachers are supposed to be meek.
Quiet.
And, all of this stuff. And from my sense was like, my defensive sense was like, oh, we're supposed to be fake.
Right.
I just want to be honest and authentic and real. But I really saw that like later, after some shit went down, I saw like, oh, I wasn't really seeing myself clearly of how others were seeing me.
I'm going to do my Mike Wallace 60 Minutes, and I quote, this is the path of the spiritual revolutionary is a long-term and gradual journey toward awakening. If you are looking for a quick fix or an easy salvation, turn back now. Plug back into the matrix and enjoy your delusional existence. This is a path for rebels, malcontents, and truth seekers. The wisdom and compassion of the Buddha is available to us all, but the journey to freedom is arduous. It will take a steadfast commitment to truth and at times counter-instinctual action, which you will have at your disposal. Let's talk about that, man. That is so money.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's how I made sense of doing spiritual practice. I, was somebody my whole life that was going against the norm, rebelling against society and the system and ignorance and greed and hatred and delusion. And when I heard that the Buddha characterized his path to awakening as going against the stream, as an act of rebelling against the human tendency to take everything personal and cling and resent and hate, I was like, oh, okay, this is a way for me to frame that natural rejection energy, rebellion energy that I have into awakening, into service, into healing. So when I heard the Buddha said against the stream, so then I was like, okay, let me teach this path as a path of rebellion because it's part of what he's saying. Which was different than my hippie teachers that were saying kind of like, you gotta just kind of let go and go with the flow.
Yeah, no, you're in my philosophy is we're going to deal with this head on. We're going to take the abandonment. We're going to take the violence. We're going to take the trauma. We're going to take the sexual acting. We're going to look at it head on.
Just turn towards it.
We're going to go straight towards it because there's no shortcuts here. There's no shortcuts. You're looking for a shortcut. And then you speak to that. And that's why I think you have the following, because people needed to hear that.
Yeah.
They really needed to hear that. And I'm going to do one other quote that I just love. Well, hang on, that's so good. That's so good. Okay, another video. We must not confuse letting go of past injuries with feeling an obligation to let the injuries back into our life. The freedom of forgiveness often includes a firm boundary and loving distance from those who have harmed us. As my father likes to say, we can let them back into our hearts without ever letting them back into our house. Oof. Let's talk about that.
I feel like that's such an important understanding because so often people conflate forgiveness with reconciliation. If I forgive you, I got to hang out with you again. Rather than forgiveness is an emotional state of heart and mind. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a reconciliation or a reconnection. And that often, sometimes, the healthiest thing to do is to have a really good boundary. Make the amends, do the forgiveness, and move on. Keep it moving.
Keep it moving.
Because, one of the tricky things about that I think I write about later in that chapter is, often we think about that like I have to have boundaries with you because you hurt me. And often that's true. Sometimes we have to have boundaries with ourselves because I will misbehave if I re-enter this relationship. I need to stay away from you.
Well, that's right.
Even if you want to connect. And I need to stay away from you because I don't have the skill yet to not harm you. And when I harm you, I harm myself. So out of self-love and compassion for you, keep it moving.
Keep it moving. Right. Right on.
Which is hard. Sometimes people feel like, well, part of the amends is they want to reconnect. But do you really have the skill to not hurt them again?
Right on.
And that humility be like, not yet.
Not yet, not there yet.
I want to make the amends, but also I'll probably reoffend in that situation.
Right.
So I need to have a personal boundary with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Offer the forgiveness, ask for the forgiveness, and have a boundary. Even with family sometimes. Family's the hardest one.
Always.
It's always the hardest one of people are like, well, they're my family, so I have to deal with them. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not true. You don't have to.
Yeah.
You can really change the relationship to family.
Dr. Paul wrote the Great Acceptance Prayer. He would always say the toughest place to work the program's in your own home. The love I have for the newcomer just barfed and stole from me all day long.
Yeah.
But my wife asked me to take out the garbage. What the fuck's the problem here? Right?
Sure.
So let's move in this direction. You've got the 3 different centers, right? The meditation centers, is that 3?
Currently?
No.
Back then?
Back then.
We had 2 centers in Los Angeles, Hollywood, and Santa Monica. We had a center in San Francisco.
Oh, right.
We had affiliated centers in New York City,
Right.
Seattle, Nashville, Boston. And then there was also all of these kind of groups. I trained all of these teachers. So then
around the world.
All of these teachers also teaching that don't necessarily have their own center.
Right.
But all of those 6 or 7 places had their own brick and mortar places.
You've got a treatment center.
Opened a treatment center in 15
Right.
or 14.
You got a detox.
Detox, sober living, outpatient.
Right. A lot going on. A lot of healing. Helping lots of people.
Lots of people.
And then one day it changes.
It all changed in 2018, 17, 18. You want me to tell the story?
Yeah, I would love. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We have to tell a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
In 2018, a woman that I was dating, been dating for a couple months, a lot of particular backstories with her. A friend of mine dated her. I'd been given a little warning of like, careful. I ignored that warning. I'd been divorced. I'd been married for almost 10 years. I got divorced in 15. And so this is like in 17, first couple years out of my marriage, back on the market. And that was part of what I was talking about before, like back on the market and not seeing that I'm famous. I didn't really, I sort of knew it, but I didn't really embody that. I was a little bit of denial about it. And that, people, were attracted to the role and the power. But I had a very strong ethics about no students, not dating students, not anything in my world. So I started dating online. This particular woman, somebody set me up with, actually. And after a couple months, we were dating one night. We were together, slept together. The next day, she started texting me, I want to talk to you about consent. And I was surprised and confused and a little bit angry, a little bit kind of like, what do you mean consent? And we had a back and forth. And she wouldn't pick up the phone. She texted a little bit. She asked me to go see her therapist. And I said, we've been dating for a couple months. We're not even in a committed relationship. We're just dating. I don't want to go see your therapist. Like, let's talk. Looking back, I regret. I wish I would have followed through on some of her requests, because what she did was she went to the police and said he sexually assaulted me. Yeah. And then a few months later, the police, no charges, didn't do anything. But since, nothing happened there, she was also a Buddhist in the Zen world. And her teacher sent out a public letter to my organizations, Refuge and Against the Stream, my teachers' organizations, Spirit Rock, and all of these different orgs that said I raped her. And there was this public accusation of rape. And which was confusing and painful and devastating for everything that I had created. Even though it was absolutely not true, from my perspective, and our communication seemed good. She never told me what happened. But from her accusation, something during our last intercourse, and we'd slept together many times, she said, you didn't ask, whatever it was. I never even got the whole story. It just went from, I want to talk to you about consent, to Noah's a rapist.
Right. Wow.
Without any context of this was a relationship we were in.
What year are we at now?
17, 18.
Yeah.
So that accusation and some internal politics within my organization, power, and, just became the kind of devastating. The treatment center closed, the meditation centers closed, and I was sort of left out there with maybe I'd say 3/4 of my community walked away. About 1/4 of my students and community, and less than 1/4 of my friends and colleagues stuck around. And a lot of them even said to me, we know this isn't true about you, but you're just bad for business now. Including my own teachers, including Jack Cornfield. At one point said to me, I know this isn't really true, but you're just too bad for business. We got to throw you under the bus.
Wow.
Because it's 2018 and Me Too and Weinstein and, an accusation like that, anytime, hopefully, but particularly then at the kind of height of the Me Too movement, it was just devastating. Nobody wanted to give me much support.
And how were you taking care of yourself during these times?
Meditation, meetings, psychotherapy, service. Also that sort of I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And, I went on retreats and I, weekly therapy and up to the forgiveness game, and the compassion game, and that balance of sitting with the feelings of pain and betrayal and loss. A deep investigation into what was my part, how, what was the harm, not only in this relationship, but these people around me that I thought were my friends that didn't support me. What was my part in creating those relationships where I didn't get any support, where they were really quick to walk away from me?
Yeah, no, tell listeners why what's our part is probably the most important thing about waking up.
Yeah, because I feel like it's the most important part because it's the only thing we can do anything about. Right. And we have to see that part clearly of I was part of some of the reflections I was talking about earlier in the podcast of I could see the arrogance or the denial or that, ways that I wasn't seeing myself clearly. So, one of my closest friends said, you were pushy with me. You pushed me into being a teacher or opening a meditation center. And, and I could see my defensive mind saying well, you said you wanted to do that, so I showed you how to do it. And yes, I did sort of push you into the San Francisco Center. The guy up there didn't want to open a center. He just wanted to teach the class. But I had given him this class where there was 150 people coming. And then, I had opened these other centers and he had sustained it. But that group, there was this huge group that said, we want a meditation center. He didn't want to do it. And I kind of pushed him into it. So that was one of the things I was I pushed you into it. Another guy at the time had said, you're the, master at ethical manipulation.
Wow.
You're really good at getting people to do stuff that they don't want to do, but that's good for them. And so I had sort of taken that self-view of like, yeah, sometimes I'm probably a little bit pushy, but not for my gain, but like for stuff that's good for you. Now, I could see in that kind of my part, there was some delusion in that view of like, yeah, it was good for him and he got a good salary and all that. But also it was good for me and my brand to have all of these meditation centers, and I was benefiting from it. And so I got to see my part was, it wasn't altruistic. There was a part of self and self, aggrandizement or whatever that was in that. And I got to see some of those pieces. And I got to make amends to all of the, so what I did a new kind of inventory. I went to all of the people that I, felt harmed by and saw my part and made amends for my part. Some, and this is like hundreds of thousands of dollars from my nonprofits walks away. My mailing list walks away. It was like almost $500,000 in my mind was stolen, out of these accounts of these organizations that I had built. The thing about building nonprofit organizations is that you don't own it. It belongs to the nonprofit. And when the nonprofit kicks you out, they take the money.
Oh, wow.
Right? Wow. So, because I had put everything 20 years into building these nonprofit organizations. And then they were just like, oh, we'll keep this money. You go away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So making those amends, seeing my part, making amends, doing the forgiveness practice, and then just carrying on of like, I'll just show up. I had this feeling through that period of like, I had like almost like a musician or something. Of like I had some successful albums. And I was playing stadiums, and it was fun. And then I got a really bad review, and no more stadiums. And I'm back to the clubs, and 3/4 of the audience says, we hate you now, and we think you're a bad person, even though without ever really investigating it, just like we heard this gossip, so you're out. And I was like, okay, well, I'll play clubs. I'll show up to my weekly. Here in the West Side Venice, I've been teaching this Monday night class for 20 years.
Right. That's beautiful.
And it used to be 150 people, standing room only. And now 30 people show up in person and 50 people show up on Zoom. Still 80 people.
Yeah.
It's great. But it's not what it used to be. But I'm a Dharma teacher. I'm here to use my life to be of service. Whether it's big or it's small, I'll show up. I'll show up.
But after everything, when you had to close everything down, how many jobs were lost?
Dozens.
All of it. Lots.
Dozens, yeah.
A lot of people lost their jobs.
20, 30
Techs.
people.
People's first sober job was gone.
Drivers.
Psychiatrists. I mean, it's got to be, yeah. Mm-hmm. You put a lot of people to work.
There's a lot of people working there.
Yeah.
And it was great. We're getting people to meditate. And we got some great success stories. There's still some people in the community that went through there 8 years ago, and are still sober, and it's great.
And so, no rest, nothing was ever put. It's nothing. It just nothing. Nothing.
I was never charged with anything.
Anything.
No.
And you're great. Your teachers turned against you. And I was thinking, wow, and I know he was such a big part of your life. I'm sure he taught you about forgiveness. And now here you're having to use the practice he gave you to forgive him.
Yeah. And the big question that people kept asking me of like, how are all these Buddhists not being more kind of compassionate and forgiving and supportive?
Right.
Where's the forgiveness? Where's the inclusion? Because I went to them and said, what can we do to have some sort of, what is that term of like restorative justice? I was like, I want to speak with this woman. I want to speak with anybody that feels harmed by me. Can we create a process? I want to take full responsibility for anything that I've actually done, but I'm also going to stay strong. At one point, some of my teachers were like, just fall on the sword, tell everyone that you are a sex addict and that's why this happened. And I was like, I can't, because that's not true for me.
Yeah, right on.
That sort of the old, like, go to rehab and then it'll go away. And I was like, if it was true for me, I wish that were, I mean, not that I don't wish that were true, but I was like, I just have to show up and tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And what's true is that maybe I was unskillful in some way, but there was no communication about that. I don't know. And so I can't fall on a sword. I can't lie about what happened.
So during this time when your reputation, people aren't returning your calls, money's gone.
Oh, I'm not calling them.
Way
too arrogant to call them.
And you're not scared.
They're not calling me.
You have faith that it's all going to shake out and these are great lessons for you.
All my money went away, but I, been teaching and practicing and believing that money is not a refuge.
Right.
And that there's no material solution. So, what nobody can take away is our wisdom or our compassion or our loving heart. And I didn't lose any of that. If anything, this whole process helped me become more accepting and more loving and more generous and more compassionate. And so in that way, this whole dilemma benefited me personally. It didn't benefit my community. It didn't benefit, there are stories about people that relapsed and, because of the gossip, the false narrative that they were told. That's tragic. But for me, I was kind of like, I'll be okay.
Now, could you go into more detail about, you went through all this, what you learned about, you didn't know you're kind of a rock star and students. Were there anything with students? Did anything happen there?
Not really.
Right.
No. And even like they did this whole investigation of like, has anybody else had any, harm from Noah? And they got 10 entries, 10 people. And part of the problem was that then they spread, there's 10 accusations against Noah, and it sounded like there's 10 sexual assaults accusations. But the reality of those were, I think 7 or 8 of them were just character complaints. I think Noah's like this or like that, or, he offended me in a Dharma talk. He said something, offensive, or, it was all really sort of just some character assassination. There were 2 women that I had dated, neither of them who were students, who both said everything was consensual, but he was a little passionate or aggressive or, for me. He, both of them said, he honored all of my boundaries, but I didn't love it. So, that was the consent, and there was 0 students, not one, I've been teaching for 20 years. Thousands of students, not one came and said like, hey, he was inappropriate sexually or anything like that with me. Because I hadn't been.
Right on. Well,
there was nothing to be said.
Right.
Yeah. Since I was a kid, through all of the stuff, the suicidal feelings, through everything, I had this sense, I'm going to be okay no matter what.
Right.
I'm going to be okay no matter. I always had that sense. And some of it was, I'll be okay. I'll just kill myself and that'll be okay too. But I've always had this sort of probably a little bit defensive feeling of like, I'll be okay no matter what. So when all of that shit went down, I had that core feeling of, I'll be okay. Whatever happens. Money, no money, I'll be okay. I don't need the stuff. That's not my source of happiness.
You right. Why we're in recovery, we need to be able to strike a balance between not allowing our ego to do all the talking and not letting our low self-esteem to only present what is wrong with us. Oof. Oof, 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 oof. Let's talk about that.
One of the wonderful things about mindfulness is that eventually, after you've practiced for some time, you start to get some awareness of what's happening in your mind and where it's coming from, and is this coming from inflation? You can kind of, that pause where you can kind of, one of the teachings in Buddhism is right speech. Is it true? Is it useful? Is it appropriately timed? Is it coming from a place of kindness? And so you start investigating what you're saying, how you're presenting yourself, of like, is this true? Is this the appropriate time? Is it useful? And even if it seems true, where's it coming from? What's my intention in showing up in the conversation like this? Is it to kind of self-aggrandize, make myself look better? Or is it that self-centeredness of inferiority of like, I don't know anything? getting that discernment and being able to actually choose where we're speaking from, where we're acting from. It's a little bit of an advanced practice. You can't just do that, but meditation leads to that ability and that skill.
Let's give practical exercises. Like you talk so much about, I love it, like a beginner's mind. What can somebody that's got 3 days of sobriety, or the housewife who's struggling with her kid's addiction, or what are practical get started? What's a good starter kit?
Yeah, I feel like the starter kit is a little bit like where I started, and it's where the Buddha starts his meditation instructions, which is he says, sit down and basically ignore your mind and pay attention to your breath. And every time your attention goes back into thinking about the future or the past, disengage. Bring your awareness out of the content of that thought. Come back to the breath. Now, it's important, the context here. People so often think like, I have to stop thinking. There's nowhere that it's saying stop your mind.
Good luck.
Stop paying attention to your mind. Stop obeying your mind. Start developing that. And the more you meditate, the more you start to see, man, my mind's not very trustworthy. It's giving me really bad advice a lot of the time. And I need to be a little bit more skeptical about my own views and my own opinions and my own habitual reactive tendencies. So the first piece is disengage. Come back to the breath. Come back to the body. Come back to the present. Get out of the story. Get out of the memory, the resentment. Come back to here. And then the tools around replacing. Start replacing those resentful, tendencies of mine with, I forgive you as much as I can. Start planting the seeds of wisdom, even if you don't feel it yet. I forgive you. Please forgive me. I forgive myself. So some of it's learning to ignore the mind, and then it begins training the mind.
Yes.
And the mind's not going to train itself, and you can read all of the great meditation books, but you have to sit down and do it.
Right.
And actually, develop both that concentration, which is the ignoring your mind, and the replacing. And then ultimately, mindfulness. And this isn't the beginner, but I think it's important even for the beginners to see the map. Where can this take me? You can't do it yet, but where it can take you is you can learn to ignore, you can learn to replace, and then you can learn to observe that everything's impermanent, arising and passing, arising and passing. And that there's some choice on what thoughts we interact with and really identify with. The Buddha said, comes from the Buddhist teaching where he said, when it's an unwholesome thought, don't engage. Replace it with something wholesome. When it's, coming from greed or hatred or delusion, shortcomings, defects, whatever it is, just, notice that those they'll happen. You can't stop them from happening, but you don't have to identify with them, don't have to engage with them. And you can start to replace them with I forgive you, or loving kindness, or compassion. Ultimately, meditation will, that you start by ignoring, then replacing, and then observing, and you start to see it's all impermanent. It's all arising and passing, and it's all really very impersonal. The mind has a mind of its own. It's not me, my mind. It's just what the human mind does. It thinks, it remembers, it compares, it judges, it resents. It's just what the human brain does. And you start to not take it so personal, not self, impersonal. And that humility of this insight of and my views and opinions aren't that reliable. I have them, you have them, everyone has them, but don't get too attached to them because they're just not that reliable as a source of information. It's my own mind. Such a weird thing. All of us, we can look back at our lives and be like, I was so often wrong about what I thought. I was so convinced I was right, and I was so often wrong. But then in the present, we still have that experience of being convinced that we're right. Rather than having that humility of these are my views and opinions. Could be true, could not be true. I don't know.
When are you your happiest?
I find that a weird question and a hard question to answer. For me, happiness is about contentment with whatever is. And I believe that actually happiness can exist in the midst of pain. the truth is I'm probably happiness when I'm not in pain.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to, happiness has to include difficulties, has to include pain, not a happiness that's only dependent on pleasure and, the right kind of attention and all of that. My goal is to kind of have a consistent happiness. The short answer is I'm probably happiest when I'm like having pleasure. That's the easiest, but also the lowest form of happiness. To be having sense pleasures or material things. Probably when I'm happiest. But it feels like the lowest form. It feels like such a higher form of happiness when I'm in the midst of difficulty and I'm not taking it that personal. And I'm responding with the appropriate compassion or non-attachment or whatever's called for. That's when I really feel like, I had this experience on retreat a couple weeks ago. I was on a 10-day retreat and I was having this on retreat, I have some very high experiences of happiness sometimes. And it was all about my mind, feeling some resentment and I was replacing it with forgiveness. And then there was this shift from forgiveness to appreciation to the people that I had felt harmed by, because it gave me this opportunity to become more compassionate. It wasn't pleasant, but it was a real heart-opening form of happiness to be like, these wounds are opportunities for freedom. And I want to get free more than I want anything else.
Straight up. I'm happiest when I'm in the ocean, when I'm with my son, and I'm with another brother that I understand his pain and we got out and I'm celebrating with you. That's when I'm my happiest, when I'm connecting with a guy who's been through it and I relate to his pain, his loneliness, his awkwardness, who's standing up for something and can have the fucking low ride and the cigarettes and fucking teach them, fucking spit some truth. And have people go, what the fuck's this guy? Yeah, I'm not in a fancy robe. I don't have beats. This is my get down. That's when I'm my happiness. So, we just got a couple minutes. I want to end with, how can people find you for sure?
The two main organizations is Against the Stream.
Right.
Website is againstthestream.com. They can find us. I do my Monday class on Zoom every week. People can tune in from wherever. There's huge podcast, backlog of all of those Monday night guided meditations and Dharma talks. And then Refuge for people in recovery, interested in recovery, refugerecovery.org. There's hundreds of Zoom meetings every week. There's in-person meetings depending on where you live. We didn't even get into how the whole split and loss was that my Refuge Recovery community was split into, and it went from 800 meetings to 2 separate organizations. Right. And so now we're sort of rebuilding that. But Refuge is alive and well, and there's meetings on online and in person. And I do meditation retreats every year for both Refuge Recovery and Against the Stream. So people, those are the sources, refuge.org. and againstthestream.com.
And the beginner, what book should they read of yours?
Maybe it depends. If you're in recovery, read Refuge Recovery, or if you need recovery. If you're interested in Buddhism, read Against the Stream, then Heart of the Revolution. If you have a friend or you're not so interested in Buddhism, read Dharma Punks, because that might get you interested. That's my memoir where I talk about some of the stories we've talked about and how, meditation and recovery changed my life.
Right on, man. Don't stop being you, brother.
I'm going to try not to.
I don't want you to do it.
I don't think I could if I tried.
Well, I hope not. Okay. I really appreciate you being on the show, man.
My pleasure. And thank you for all the work you do. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you, brother. And we'll keep it going, huh?
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you. The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarland, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Karnalek. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.